Now let us understand this performance theory perspective, which is crucial for advanced answers. The key idea is that Shakespeare's plays are not fixed texts. They are not meant to be understood only as written literature. Instead, they are evolving performances that change every time they are staged. This has an important implication for fools and clowns. Their meaning is not fixed. It depends on several factors: the actor performing the role, the audience watching it, and the context of the performance. The same fool can appear more comic, more serious, or more philosophical depending on how the role is played. For example, a skilled actor might highlight the intellectual wit of a character like Fester, while another might focus more on humor and entertainment. Similarly, audience reactions can shape how the fool's lines are received, as jokes, criticism, or deep insight. So, meaning is not fully contained in the written script. It is created during performance. For exams, remember this powerful line: meaning in Shakespeare is produced on stage, not on page. Now let us examine the political dimension of the fool, which reveals the hidden power behind this comic figure. Fools are not powerless entertainers. In fact, they possess a unique kind of protected authority. They openly criticize kings, question authority, and expose social problems, yet they do so safely because they are labeled as fools. This label acts as a shield. For example, in King Lear, the fool directly attacks the king's decisions and mocks the idea of absolute monarchy. No other character can do this without facing punishment. But the fool survives because his criticism is wrapped in humor and irony. This creates a paradox. The least powerful character becomes the only one who can speak the most dangerous truths. So, the fool operates within the political system but also subtly challenges it. His role is both inside and outside power at the same time. For exams, remember this key line: the fool is a politically protected critic. Now let us understand the disappearance of the fool in tragedy, which carries deep symbolic meaning. In Shakespeare's tragedies, the fool does not remain throughout the play. At a crucial point, he disappears. This is not accidental. It has a strong dramatic and symbolic purpose. Take King Lear as the key example. In the early part of the play, the fool is constantly present with Lear. He criticizes him, guides him, and acts as a voice of reason and truth. But as the play moves toward deeper tragedy, the fool suddenly vanishes. After the fool disappears, we see a clear shift. Lear's madness intensifies, and the moral order collapses. There is no longer a character who can speak truth in a balanced or controlled way. The world of the play becomes chaotic and unstable. Symbolically, the disappearance of the fool represents the loss of truth. When the truth-teller is gone, confusion and disorder take over. So, the fool's presence maintains a kind of balance, and his absence marks the movement into complete tragic breakdown. For exams, remember this key idea: the disappearance of the fool symbolizes the loss of truth and the rise of chaos. Now let us understand the meta-theatrical role of the fool, which is an advanced and very important concept. Fools in Shakespeare's plays often behave as if they are aware that they are part of a performance. This gives them a meta-theatrical quality. They do not fully stay inside the illusion of the play. They frequently speak directly to the audience, comment on events, and sometimes even mock the action itself. By doing this, they break the illusion of the dramatic world. This connects to the idea of fourth wall breaking. Normally, there is an invisible wall between the actors and the audience. But the fool crosses this boundary, reminding the audience that what they are watching is a constructed performance. This technique serves two purposes. First, it creates humor and engagement. Second, it encourages the audience to think critically rather than passively watch the story. So, the fool is not just inside the play, he stands both inside and outside it at the same time. For exams, remember this key line: the fool functions as a meta-theatrical agent who breaks the dramatic illusion. Now let us understand the idea of memory culture, which is essential for linking performance with textual variation. In Shakespeare's time, actors did not work with complete printed scripts as we do today. They memorized their individual roles and performed based on rehearsal and practice. This means that performance depended heavily on human memory. Because of this, when plays were later written down or printed, they were often reconstructed from memory. This could be by actors, scribes, or even audience members. As a result, variations and inconsistencies naturally entered the text. This connects to a broader oral culture and performance tradition, where stories and dialogues are transmitted through speaking and remembering rather than fixed writing. In such a system, no single version remains completely stable. So, the texts we have today, especially quartos, may reflect these memory-based reconstructions, which explains differences between versions. For exams, remember this key line: textual instability arises from memory-based theatre. Now let us explore the deep connection between fools and madness, which is a very important conceptual insight. First, remember this key idea: the fool is not mad, but is closely linked to madness. This connection becomes very clear when we look at King Lear. In the play, King Lear gradually becomes mad, while the fool remains wise. This creates a powerful contrast. As Lear loses his power and control over reality, the fool continues to see clearly and speak truth. We can understand this contrast in a simple way. Lear represents madness and loss of power, while the fool represents wisdom and retained insight. So, even though the fool appears foolish on the surface, he actually understands the situation better than the king. At the same time, there is also a connection. Lear's madness begins to reveal truths about human nature, suffering, and justice. However, Lear cannot express these truths clearly. It is the fool who articulates them in a structured and meaningful way through wit and language. So, madness and folly work together. One reveals truth, and the other explains it. For exams, remember this powerful line: madness reveals truth, the fool articulates it. Now let us examine the gender dimension of the fool, which adds another layer of critical insight. Most fools in Shakespeare's plays are male characters. However, what is interesting is that they do not always reinforce traditional masculinity. Instead, they often mock masculine authority and question ideas of power, control, and dominance. Through humor and irony, the fool exposes how fragile and performative masculinity can be. Kings, nobles, and powerful men are often shown as foolish, while the fool, who appears weak, speaks the real truth. In this way, the fool undermines authority and challenges fixed gender roles. To understand this better, we can compare the fool with Rosalind from As You Like It. Rosalind disguises herself as a man and uses wit, language, and role-playing to question gender identity. Like the fool, she blurs boundaries and shows that identity is not stable but constructed. So, both the fool and characters like Rosalind challenge rigid ideas of gender and power. For exams, remember this key point: the fool destabilizes identity, both gender and power. Now let us clearly understand the quarto, which is essential for textual study of Shakespeare. A quarto is a type of book format. It is made by folding a sheet of paper twice, which creates 4 leaves or 8 pages. Because of this method, quartos were cheap to produce and widely circulated, making them the most common way Shakespeare's plays first appeared in print. Now, there are 2 important types of quartos. First, the good quarto. This is considered a more reliable and accurate version of the text. It is usually based on an authorial manuscript or a carefully prepared copy. So, it reflects the play more closely to how it was originally written or intended. Second, the bad quarto. This is less accurate and often contains errors, missing lines, or altered passages. These versions were usually created through memorial reconstruction, meaning they were reconstructed from the memory of actors or others who had seen or performed the play. A famous example is the early quarto version of Hamlet, which is much shorter and differs significantly from later, more reliable texts. So, for exams, remember this key idea: bad quartos are called memorial reconstructions because they are based on memory rather than an original manuscript. Now let us understand the Bad Quarto Controversy, which is an important shift in modern criticism. Earlier scholars believed that bad quartos were simply corrupted or inferior texts. Because they contain errors, omissions, and unusual variations, they were dismissed as unreliable and not useful for serious study. However, the modern view challenges this assumption. Critics now argue that these quartos may not be bad at all. Instead, they might represent different performance versions of the play. For example, some bad quartos could be touring versions, adapted for smaller audiences or shorter performances. Others may be abridged scripts used on stage, where long speeches and complex scenes were cut to suit practical needs. This perspective connects to the idea that Shakespeare's plays were living performances, not fixed texts. So variations are natural and meaningful. A well-known case is Hamlet, where the shorter quarto version may reflect a performance-oriented script rather than a corrupted one. So, for exams, remember this key insight. Bad quartos are not necessarily bad, they are simply different versions shaped by performance needs. Now let us clearly understand the folio, which is crucial for Shakespearean textual study. A folio is a large book format made by folding a sheet of paper only once, creating 2 leaves or 4 pages. Because of its size and production quality, it was expensive and considered more authoritative than quartos. The most important example is the First Folio, published in 1623. It was compiled by 2 of Shakespeare's fellow actors, John Hemmings and Henry Condell. The full title of this collection is Mr. William Shakespeare's Comedies, Histories and Tragedies. Its importance cannot be overstated. The First Folio preserved 18 plays that might otherwise have been lost. Without it, we would not have some of Shakespeare's most famous works, including Macbeth and Twelfth Night. Today, the folio serves as a standard and authoritative text for Shakespeare studies. It is the foundation on which much of modern Shakespeare scholarship is built. So, for exams, remember this key idea. Without the First Folio, a significant part of Shakespeare's work would not have survived. Now let us clearly compare quarto and folio, which is a very important slide for quick revision and exam answers. First, in terms of size. Quartos are small books because the paper is folded twice, while folios are large since the paper is folded only once. This physical difference also affects their usage and value. Next, the cost. Quartos are cheap and easily available, which means they were widely circulated among the general public. In contrast, folios are expensive and were meant for more serious or wealthy readers. Now, accuracy. Quartos are sometimes faulty, especially in the case of bad quartos, which may contain errors due to memory-based reconstruction. On the other hand, folios are considered more reliable because they were carefully compiled and edited, often using better source materials. Finally, the audience. Quartos were aimed at the general public, making Shakespeare accessible to a wider audience. Folios, however, were intended for elite readers, scholars, and collectors. So, in simple terms, quarto equals small, cheap, widely available, sometimes inaccurate. Folio equals large, expensive, authoritative, and more reliable. This comparison helps you quickly understand the textual and cultural differences between the two formats. Now let us understand the textual problem in Shakespeare, which is a key concept for exams. First, multiple versions. The same play often exists in different forms. For example, Hamlet and King Lear both have quarto and folio versions that differ in length, wording, and even scenes. This means there is no single, fixed text of a play. Second, the issue of authorial intention. Because of these variations, an important question arises: which version represents what Shakespeare actually intended? Is it the earlier quarto, the later folio, or a combination of both? Scholars still debate this, and there is no final answer. Third, the tension between performance and print. Shakespeare wrote his plays mainly for the stage, not for reading as literature. Printing came later, often under different conditions and purposes. So, what we read today may not exactly match what was originally performed. All these points lead to one important conclusion. For exams, remember this key insight: Shakespeare is a performance-based writer. This means his works are best understood as living performances rather than fixed written texts. Now let us understand the journey from draft to print, which explains how Shakespeare's plays moved from writing to publication. First, we have foul papers. These are the author's initial drafts, written by William Shakespeare. They are rough and unpolished, containing corrections, crossings out, and additions. These drafts show the creative process in action. Scholars believe that some quartos may have been printed using such imperfect materials, which explains textual variations. Next comes the fair copy. This is the clean and final handwritten version of the play. It is more organized, corrected, and suitable for reading or printing. This version was often used by printers as a reliable source, and sometimes even presented as an official manuscript. Finally, we have the prompter's copy, also called the book of the play. This is the theatre's working script. It includes detailed stage directions, actor cues, sound effects, and entrances and exits. It is designed for performance rather than reading. Many scholars believe that this type of copy was an important source for the First Folio. So, these three stages, foul papers, fair copy, and prompter's copy, show that Shakespeare's texts evolved through both writing and performance processes. For exams, remember this key idea: Shakespeare's texts are the result of a continuous process from draft to stage to print, not a single fixed document. Now let us understand the timeline of the Four Folios, which shows how Shakespeare's works were preserved and transmitted over time. First, the First Folio, 1623. This is the most important edition. It was compiled by John Hemmings and Henry Condell, who were close associates of William Shakespeare. This volume forms the foundation of Shakespeare's collected plays and saved many works from being lost. Next, the Second Folio, 1632. This edition is known for including a famous tribute by John Milton titled, An Epitaph on the Admirable Dramatic Poet, W. Shakespeare. It shows how Shakespeare's reputation continued to grow after his death. Then, the Third Folio, 1663–64. This edition is significant because it expanded the collection by including Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and 6 other apocryphal plays. However, not all of these editions are considered authentically Shakespearean. Finally, the Fourth Folio, 1685. This is the last of the 17th century folio editions. It does not add much new content but stands as a final consolidation and preservation of Shakespeare's works during that period. So, these 4 folios together show the process of preservation, expansion, and canon formation in Shakespeare studies. For exams, remember this key idea: the folios are not just reprints, they reflect the evolving status and reception of Shakespeare over time. Now let us look at the missing plays of the First Folio, 1623, which is a very important exam area. Even though the First Folio is highly authoritative, it is not complete. Some plays that are now associated with Shakespeare were not included in it. The most important example is Pericles, Prince of Tyre. This is often called the most famous omission. It was not included in the 1623 folio, possibly due to issues of authorship or copyright. Later, it was added in the Third Folio of 1664. Next, The Two Noble Kinsmen. This play was co-written with John Fletcher, which may be one reason it was excluded from the First Folio. Collaborative works were not always included in the original collection. Another example is Edward III. This play was not part of the First Folio, but modern scholars now often attribute it, at least partially, to Shakespeare. So, these omissions show that the First Folio does not fully represent everything Shakespeare wrote or contributed to. For exams, remember this key tip. If asked which play was not included in the 1623 First Folio, the most common answer is Pericles.